Good news for any Apple M1 Mac users out there. Editing in Davinci Resolve just got 3 times faster, and you've got up to 65% faster exports as well. That's crazy. Now, it's not just good news for you Apple people. There's some other general Windows performance increases as well, plus some handy new features which they've added into this new version of Davinci Resolve. So my name's Alex. This is MrAlexTech, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Davinci Resolve 17.3 update. Now this 17.3 update is a free update. It's available right now whether you're using the free or studio versions of Davinci Resolve. You can either download it directly from the Blackmagic support website, which I've linked down in the description below for you, or alternatively, if you've already got Davinci Resolve installed, just open Resolve, click on Davinci Resolve in the top left hand corner, check for updates, and it should prompt you that 17.3 is available, and then you can download it and install it from there. Now, also linked in the description below is a link to the press release which Blackmagic released to go along with this 17.3 update. Because it's quite a big one, I can't go through everything in this video, so go check out the press release for yourself to see all of the new features. In this video, I'm just going to talk about the things which are relevant to me and hopefully are most relevant to you as well. So first up, let's start with that big headline, that 3 times faster performance when using M1 devices. I'm just going to read the blurb which Blackmagic have released. Blackmagic Design today announced Davinci Resolve 17.3, which adds support for a completely new processing engine that transforms the speed of Davinci Resolve to work up to 3 times faster on Apple Mac models with the M1 chip. With this massive speed increase, customers can now play back, edit and grade 4K projects faster, and even work on 8K projects on an Apple M1 notebook. The new processing engine uses tile-based rendering, which also gives customers up to 30% longer battery life on laptop computers when working in Davinci Resolve. Now, to me, that sounds like great news indeed, because I myself have got an Apple MacBook Air. It's the 8GB 512GB edition. Now, obviously, that blurb is specifically talking about the MacBooks because it mentions battery life, but the same performance increases will happen on any of the M1 based devices, so that includes the iMacs and the Mac Minis. But is it actually true? Because 3 times faster is a pretty bold claim. It's kind of difficult to prove, honestly, because we're talking about timeline and grading performance. You can't benchmark it quite as easily as you could a render, for example. But I've thrown together a real quick sort of rudimentary test to see if it is faster, and I can confirm there is a noticeable performance upgrade on 17.3 than there was on the previous 17.2. As I took some 6K 25 frames per second Blackmagic RAW footage and I dropped it onto a 6K 25 frames per second timeline on Davinci Resolve 17.2. There was no optimized media or proxies being used, everything was being done at full 6K resolution. I then did some real basic grading just to give it a bit more contrast, a bit more color, make it look more like an actual real world sort of project. Then on the edit page, I just did some playback. I clicked around to see how well it performed, but there was noticeable stutter in the preview window, as you can see here. The frame rate certainly wasn't holding that 25 frames per second. I wasn't able to watch it back or play back in real time, and it was just a little bit choppy when I was clicking around. I then hopped into the color tab to perform a very similar test, and the same thing. The preview window actually looked slightly less stuttery, but the little frame rate counter was showing that I was getting about 21-ish frames per second rather than the full 25 frames per second. I then closed Davinci Resolve, upgraded to 17.3, reopened the exact same project, same timeline, using all of the same files. I deleted the render cache just to be sure, and then performed the exact same test. And it was noticeably improved. It was much quicker and snappier and more responsive when clicking around the timeline, and I was able to get everything to play back in real time with really no issues whatsoever. On occasion, it would sort of stutter for the first second, and then it'd catch up with itself and play back in the 25 frames per second. But as you can see from here, it really is quite snappy. I then jumped over to the color page, tried the same thing again, and again, it was much improved. Everything was quicker, more responsive, and I was getting the full 25 frames per second playback. Now, I haven't any 8K to test, just that 6K, but I was very impressed with the responsiveness of that 6K footage. If you're using 4K footage or anything less, 1080p, you should really have no issues at all editing, grading, doing all that sort of stuff on an M1 based device. They were already quite impressive. This just makes them a little bit better still, which just means they're even more usable as an on-the-go little Davinci Resolve editing laptop, which is exactly what I use my MacBook Air for. And then there's those up to 65% faster exports. So again, Blackmagic have said Davinci Resolve 17.3 also supports a new option on Mac computers with M1 for H.265 hardware encoding. Customers can choose to prioritize speed versus quality when rendering, further improving render times up to 65%. Now, I actually export all of my videos in H.265 because generally they look as good, but they're faster to export and they have smaller files. It means they're quicker to upload to YouTube, so it's just a win all round. So having faster exports in 265 from my MacBook is always a bonus. That's really great for me. Now, again, it's up to 65%. You might not necessarily see 65%. It's going to vary on lots and lots of different things, but I was able to put it to test, and again, I noticed quite a drastic improvement. I used a project which I completed only a few days ago. It's actually on my channel. It's my video assist Q&A with my Panasonic S5. I used that project because it's about 20 minutes long. It has lots of 4K Blackmagic RAW as well as some 4K 8-bit footage from my Sony a7 III. All of it's been color graded. There's some transitions in there, some basic text and animations and that sort of thing. So I figured it'd make for a pretty good test. These are the export settings you're seeing on screen now. So it's H.265, full 4K, 25 frames per second. This was on 17.2 and it took a little over 18 minutes to export. That's still not bad, really. It was exporting it just faster than real time, but total of 18 minutes. So again, we just upgraded to Davinci Resolve 17.3. Here are the export settings I used. You can see there's the little tick box, which is prioritized for speed. This has been added in this new version of Davinci Resolve. Again, I made sure to delete the render cache and no one could call me out on that. And I was able to export the exact same project in just 13 minutes and 40 seconds. So that's almost a 5-minute speed increase. 5 minutes on an 18-minute render is very, very impressive indeed, especially since I haven't actually changed anything other than just downloaded a new version of Davinci Resolve. And then purely for transparency and to create a bit of a baseline, I then moved that exact project over to my Windows PC, also running Davinci Resolve 17.3, and then exported it from there in full 4K H.265 using my NVIDIA 2060 graphics card, and that ran it out in 7 minutes and 50 seconds. So the MacBook still isn't as fast as a full fat dedicated GPU, but honestly, I didn't ever expect it to. It's a tiny fanless little laptop that I can take anywhere. The fact that it can run this project at all, to me, is really impressive. The fact that I can export it in 13 minutes now is very impressive. But yeah, I don't want anyone to be confused to say that they're faster than dedicated GPUs, because they're not, but they are very, very impressive, and Davinci Resolve just made them a little bit more impressive still. Now, talking of Windows, that's enough of some of the Apple love now. Now we're going to talk about Windows love, and they've improved H.264 and H.265 decode performance in Windows Intel systems. So if you're using an Intel-based CPU, you should have overall better performance in Davinci Resolve when using 264 or 265 footage. They've added support for decoding MKV files using the VP9 video codecs. So a few versions back, they actually added support for these MKV files, which I know is a big thing lots of people were waiting for. So they've now just expanded that to include these VP9 codecs. Probably a little bit niche, but for those that affects, hopefully that's good news indeed. Now, still talking about MKV files, they've improved decode performance for MKV clips with AAC and AC3 audio. Again, pretty niche, but if you're using those files, things should be slightly faster. So, well, hey. Now onto Fairlight. There's actually a whole list. There's a whole bunch of improvements they've made to the Fairlight page within Davinci Resolve. I'm not a Fairlight wizard. I don't know enough about it really to do these improvements justice, so I'm not really going to delve into them. Obviously, check out the press release for yourself to view all of these Fairlight improvements, and hopefully they'll mean something to you if you are a Fairlight wizard. Now, last but not least, they've added a bunch of new features into Davinci Resolve. Some of these are brand new things. They're nothing major like some of the older things, but this is a incremental update, 17.3, rather than the jump from 16 to 17, for example. But they're quite nice. They're quite handy little features that just make life a little easier and allow you to do a few extra bits. So I've picked my favorites, the ones that I think are most relevant. I'm going to open up Davinci Resolve now, and I'll just show you what they are, what they do, how they work, and all that fun stuff. So first up, DRFX files can now be installed with a double click on Windows and Linux. This is awesome. In a nutshell, what that means is if I create a transition pack full of 20 transitions, I can now wrap them all up into a single file, which I can send out to you guys, and then you can literally just double click the file to install it into your Davinci Resolve. Just makes life way easier for everyone. Now this says Windows and Linux, but I tested it on my Mac and I could do it on Mac as well. So I'm wondering if maybe they snuck this into an update for Mac previously, so now basically it's available for everyone, which is awesome. Next up, shape and iris transitions can now be rotated from the inspector. This is a cool one, don't know how useful it is, but it's a nice little addition, so let me show you. So we're just going to jump into the edit page. In my effects library, video transitions, up here you've got all of these iris transitions. Oh, that's hard to say. Iris transitions, iris. And then scroll down, we've got these shape transitions. So let me just grab the heart one for now. We'll pop that on there. It looks a little something like this with this big heart-shaped transition. Now, if we give it a click, we open up the inspector, transitions, we've got this rotation, and we can just drag this to rotate the shape of this heart. You can also keyframe this so you can have this to be rotating as the transition occurs. They've added a Resolve FX motion blur for dedicated motion blur across pages. Again, this is quite a cool one. You could do motion blur within the Fusion page or the color page previously, but now they've added a dedicated effects purely for that. So we're going to jump back into Davinci Resolve. I'm going to open up the open effects and we're going to scroll down until we've got this motion blur here within the Resolve FX temporal area. Now I'm just going to hit play on this footage and show you this. So it's this slow motion footage here of this surfer dude, and you can see it's all quite sharp. There's not much motion blur in the water and all that sort of stuff. So then we're going to grab this motion blur, drop it onto our footage, and straight away you can see we've just got a little bit of extra motion blur going on, and I can hit play, and it just makes it look a little bit sort of smoother, less jittery, because everything's got a little bit of motion blur on it. If we open up the inspector, effects, we can change the options in here. So I'm going to leave it as faster for now. We're going to make it large. We'll increase the motion blur amount. And again, look, if you look here, we'll turn it off and then on. Hopefully you can see it's added that motion blur and it just makes it look a little bit nicer. Next up, we've got a new badge to identify still images on the timeline. Now, this is one of the weird ones where you look at it and you think it's always been there. So here we are in the edit page. I've got this image on my timeline and it's this little icon here is the new bit. And it just means that you can identify the difference between videos and then images, because the still images have got the little icon on them so that you know it's a still image. And we've got two that are very similar. Fusion compositions and compound clipped can now be renamed from within the inspector on the timeline. So I've got a compound clip here and I've got a fusion composition. Now, if I give the fusion composition a click, open up the inspector file, I've got name, and I can just give this whatever name I want so it's easier to identify on the timeline. Media, inspector, and other panels can now be scrolled by holding down your middle mouse button. This one might be useful for those on laptops, maybe? I don't know who this one's useful for, but it's a new addition, so I'm going to show you. So I'm going to click on this footage here. We're going to go to the video tab, and we've got the inspector list here. I can use my scroll wheel. I can use this little scroll on the right-hand side, but now I can also just click my middle mouse button. My cursor turns into a little hand, and then I can just move it up and down. Again, I don't know if anyone asked for that, but cool. Makes life easier. And then the last one I've got to show you is within the Fusion page. And this one is quite handy, actually. If you've ever built up loads of nodes in Fusion, sometimes it can be tricky to remember what's what. So they've added a little solution for that. So I'm going to add a couple of nodes, doesn't matter what they are, like so. And let's say I've got this rectangle and I renamed it to be called main 1, and this merge was called spare, I don't know, whatever. And then you go, oh, I need another one of those main, but I can't actually remember what type of node it was. We can now hold Control or Command if you're on a Mac, Control, Shift, and E, and it will just change from the renamed name to the actual name of the node. So then when you go to Control and Space, for example, to bring up the tool, you know not to look for this one, which is a Media Out 1. You know that you're actually looking for Media Space Out. Again, nice little addition just to make life a little bit easier. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed this little breakdown of 17.3. Have you downloaded it? How are you finding it? Let me know down in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. I'll catch you next time. See ya.